Alright, I think that as far as the 2020 election goes, we got the best Democratic debate that we possibly could have. All that coming up. Plus, I had an interaction with a Democrat on campus, and it was wild. Okay, so when I start talking about the Democratic debate, I think it was the best in terms of just how it made me laugh. But also, I think it was really good in the fact that there were some absolute haymakers being thrown. Obviously, Mike Bloomberg jumping into the race, Amy Klobuchar getting this interesting following, to say the very least. And obviously, people were taking hits left and right. Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg. Sanders really made it out the best, I would say, even though Mike Bloomberg did really get a good hit in on him. So I think where I want to start is kind of the lighter blows. That were still some pretty nice blows. So Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar had some really good interactions. And Amy Klobuchar was kind of laughing at Pete, but I think it was a pretty good haymaker where Pete was like, we've been working in Washington for like 10 years and everything is failing. And then she pretty much was like, well, at least I'm working in Washington, which is pretty interesting. I definitely think that Pete got the upper hand there. And also, I've just been really interested to see how he's been competing with Sanders and things like Iowa and New Hampshire. South Carolina is going to be pretty interesting because we're getting into some of the southern states. But, yeah. I think the next thing that I want to talk about is Elizabeth Warren now. She actually said some things that were funny but were also really true. She actually kind of went in on Buttigieg and Klobuchar, where she was basically like, you got your slogan from empty talking points, and Klobuchar's was like written down on a post-it note or something. But I mean, like, her statement is literally, I know what's wrong, I know how to fix it, and I'll fight to get it done. So it's like, I don't even know how to respond to that, because it's like, that is literally saying that you know there's a problem, but you're not going to address that problem. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was her with Mike Bloomberg and just how she started the debate. I mean, Bloomberg got on stage and he was knocked down within the first 5 seconds. Because Mike Bloomberg is obviously one of the richest Democrats running. And Elizabeth Warren was basically like, yeah, if we want to stand up to Trump or whatever with his greed and arrogance, it wouldn't make much sense to replace him with another greedy, arrogant millionaire. Although Bloomberg responded excellently by saying that there is no better way to get Trump elected than to listen to this conversation. And that's what I thought was kind of funny, but yeah. Now I want to get to the juicy stuff. I want to get to the two candidates that I think can win the Democratic side. And that is Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg. Now, I have heard a lot about Bernie Sanders going to the college that I go to. There are a lot of students here that are in favor of Bernie. There's a lot of organizations on campus that are trying to teach people about him. And it's interesting. There's one that goes to our college and career group. And it's very interesting talking with him because he's Jewish, and we're Christians, so we have a difference in kind of the New and Old Testament when it comes to the Bible, stuff like that. But he's a very interesting character. I love talking with him. But, yeah. And I'll get into another Bernie Sanders supporter a little bit later. But I think it was pretty interesting. Bloomberg decided to take a shot at Sanders, talking about his 3 houses. Despite talking about the greed of the upper class. And it is really interesting. A lot of people are able to easily point this out because Bernie was talking about fighting millionaires, and then he became a millionaire, and now he's fighting against billionaires. And I have a friend that was like, so when he becomes a billionaire, is it going to be trillionaires, despite that there's like five of them or something? I don't know how many trillionaires there are off the top of my head. I don't think that's something that was worth googling, but yeah, uh, pretty hypocritical coming from one of the wealthiest men on the stage. However, what I will say is that he is correct. Mike Bloomberg is correct in the fact that he is the only one that has started a business. Now, I don't fault the rich. I don't fault them because they worked there in some way, shape, or form. And even if they inherited that wealth, their predecessors that were able to inherit that wealth to them had to work at some point. So that brings me to a topic that I kind of want to segue into. It goes into employment and it goes into education. Now, first of all, I want to start off by saying that Trump is the reason we have one of the lowest employment rates we've ever had. It's also why we have some of the best economy, but we were out of debt for one day in our history, so I guess that doesn't say a whole lot for us. But going into that, something that I think is really unfortunate about employment today is employers will look at people applying. Let's say you have two people. One person has a degree and the other person has 15 years experience. I don't know why, but for some reason, the person with the degree usually gets the job, which is interesting because we got sayings like C's get degrees. And that doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know what happened between now and the middle of the 1900s, because it used to be you go to high school, you get out and go into the workforce. Now it's actually way more traditional to go to high school, go to college, graduate, and get a job. And I will tell you that in that scenario with the two people, hiring the person with a degree is very ineffective. It's ineffective because you actually have to train somebody, and not only do you have to train somebody, even when you're done training them, you have to have somebody probably, watching them or something like that. So your productivity is going to go down if you need somebody watching them. If you don't, then that stops that after they're done training. But there's no question that training takes time, and that takes away from production. Usually, when you lose time on production, you lose money as well. As where somebody could hop in, say, I got this, go do your other job, and we're good. Something that I really don't like about kind of the education system is that we really focus a lot on extracurriculars today, and that's not a bad thing. There are a lot of places that focus on extracurricular stuff. There's a lot of schools in particular that focus on the arts, and I think that's excellent. I think it's great. There's a lot of colleges that focus on that, and I think that that's really great. I think something that we can flip flop is when I was in high school, I went to a place up in Vermont, and it was more of a living and learning program. It was a program for it. And I basically, learned how to live, and I learned how to do work and things like that. And it was really interesting. Some of the things that I would have loved to see in high school, though, would be like things that could lead me toward that, like money management courses or something like that. It really is a slippery slope because for me, I actually just applied for my first credit card over the break. I got denied and then I had to apply again, so now I do have a credit card, but it took me 3-4 years out of high school to actually get one and start building credit. There's a lot of things that I could be using it on. I could use my credit card for my phone bill, for groceries, for my coffee, because I'm kind of an addict at that. And that could have built up credit. but I never really learned the significance of a credit card um, until really like a half of a year ago. And you build up your credit score, you're going to be more likely to get, cars, houses, things like that. And that's something that's way into the future because somebody like me in, I think, the middle class is more of get an apartment and then get a job and work up to it. I'm in an apartment right now. I'm actually in an apartment complex, I'm pretty sure. I'm in like a suite style, which is pretty sweet. There was another topic I wanted to touch on with climate change and that BS, but I think I'm going to save that for more of a statistical video. What I will say is nobody on the Democratic side can talk about greed and wealth because you spent $40 million on impeachment and $25 million on the Mueller hearing. Neither of those things went anywhere. More so the Mueller hearing. We never got any sort of concrete answers. It was more of the left and right both had their assumptions, and both of those assumptions were debunked. And then the impeachment was just a joke. We all knew that the House was going to impeach him, and then the Senate was going to get him off. We all knew that. But anyway, I want to get into what was happening on campus. So, there was a bunch of people that were like, oh, have you voted? Because this was voting day. And my voting experience was interesting because I had to register for the district that I was going to be in because I'm in a new district since 2016. And I went to the wrong one to register. So I was the last one to vote because I got to where I was supposed to be 10 minutes before they closed. But anyway, there were people outside that were like, oh, have you voted? And I decided, all right, I got some time to kill, I guess. So I started out strong and I was like, not yet, but I'm going to, and I'm going to vote for Trump. And she asked me why. And I just said, well, I'm voting for him just because I think he's the best candidate. And she's like, so you must be conservative. And I was like, well, yes, I am. And she asked why I was conservative. And I was like, well, the facts just seemed to line up in my answer. And she was like, well, I think the facts line up for me. And I was like, really? So anyway, we kind of got into it with Bernie, and I don't know exactly how we got into the conversation, but I was kind of like, why are you voting for Sanders or whatever? Why are you supporting him? And she's like, well, there's people like Jeff Bezos who have a lot of money that are like finding loopholes to taxes. And I was basically like, well, okay. And she's like, so Bernie's trying to tax the rich. And there was two things that crossed my mind. One, why would you tax the rich more if they're just going to find a loophole? So the first point I came out with was, well, how about instead of charging the rich more, maybe you work on the laws that make it so those loopholes are harder so you can't just hide your money overseas. And of course she was like, well, aren't those two the same thing? And it's like, no, they're not the same thing. If you raise taxes, there's still a loophole there so you can hide your money. I don't understand why she couldn't see that, but that was pretty interesting. The second topic that I think we got into was, I was like, well, I'm also majorly a Republican because I am very pro-life. Oh, that's right. The first thing that I wanted to talk about before that, though, was I love how she said that she was factually based, and then I gave her a fact, and she totally rebuked it. So, in a campaign that is, lined with talking about free healthcare and stuff like that, so there was a debate where Bernie was asked, would you raise taxes for the middle class in order to provide healthcare? And he said he would raise the taxes for the middle class. And I tried telling her that, and she was like, well, no, he's raising it for the upper class. Now, I could have gone the route that I just went to. I'm like, well, he's pretty much the upper class himself, but I didn't go there. I was like, well, okay. I mean, also, it was funny that I watched the video, like, the day before I had this conversation. I was like, okay, all right. I mean, let's go to something else. So I was like, I'm also mainly Republican because I'm pro-life, and I don't see anybody on the left that's pro-life. And then she, she took it from, you know, the general, I want to be a murderer out of convenience. And it's like, well, if I'm like a 16-year-old and I get raped or something, it's like, all right, it's not the child's fault. You don't have to kill it because of something that somebody else did. I'm a very big fan of the Daily Wire. I'm a very big fan of Ben Shapiro, and yeah, I think that rapists should be castrated. I think they should die. But I think that the child should live. You should have to keep it. There's plenty of things you can do with it. If you're in the church like I am, there's plenty of families that are willing to help you. If you're not in the church, adoption is always a thing. And you could spend that $65 million that you spent on going nowhere in improving those circumstances. But then I was like, well, I'm also attacking this from a Christian standpoint. She's like, oh yeah, I am too. And I was like, okay, well, can't we agree that God creates life? And she was like, well, not really, because I don't believe the Bible. And I was like, what? I was like, excuse me? And I know that there are people that don't believe the Bible and Christianity. I know there's people. And it's interesting because the one book, the one piece of evidence that there's actually suggests that God exists, which does, to not believe that, I almost wanted to ask, then why do you believe? And then we got into this, Christian debate of everything going on, and I tried to kind of go into, how Christ said that two witnesses makes the truth, and that there's 4 gospel books, and yada yada yada, and that wasn't really working out. So it was pretty interesting in the fact that the person who bases her political leaning on facts and bases her Christianity without the Bible also believes in abortion and lies about what Bernie is going to do. Democrats are truly the most laughable people. Although I was able to share the gospel and we had a really respectful conversation. I wouldn't say we did any destroying of each other. It was very civil, although I could have turned it into a scrap, but I wasn't feeling that savage that day. But yeah, so that's going to do it for this. Democrats are truly a sight to behold.